everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome back to our book club. I am Miss Maka.
And I am Mr. Darrell. Today, we are going to talk about a classic children's book, a wondrous tale, The Secret Garden.
So the story is by Frances Hodgson Burnett. But before we look at the story, of course, we look at the agenda for today. First, we will start with the vocabulary. Then we will continue with the information about the author. After that, we will talk about the summary, so we'll tell you what is the story about.
And then from there, we will look at the characters. These are the points that move the story forward. We have a look at the setting, good to give a context to the story. And then we'll have a look at some of the main themes of the story.
Of course. But later, of course, by the end of our program, we have to conclude the whole session and then give you a homework.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the answers that we might get from today's question.
Yeah. But what are the words that we have to do today?
Yes, so let's focus on 8 words that we have chosen because they appear in the book or we use them in our discussion today. And they are, the first word is self-healing. Self-healing. It's the act or process of taking care of yourself, healing yourself, making yourself better.
თვითგანკურნება.
Our next word is fastidious. Yes, that's how you pronounce it, fastidious. This is when you care a lot about small details and you want everything to be correct and tidy, perfect.
მეტისმეტად მომთხოვნი.
Our next word is encounter. Encounter. This is a kind of meeting, but one particularly that might be accidental, for example, not planned.
მოულოდნელი შეხვედრა.
Our next word is dormant. It's an adjective, dormant. Something that is not active or in process at the moment, but possibly could become active later on.
პასიური, უმოქმედო.
Our next word is genuine. Genuine. It's an adjective. Something real rather than pretend or faked.
რეალური, ჭეშმარიტი.
Our next word is resent. To resent, a verb. And this is when you experience angry, unhappy feelings because you think you have been treated unfairly or without enough respect.
გაბრაზება, აღშფოთება.
Our next word is to taunt. Taunt. It's a verb. This is when you shout cruel things at someone in order to make them angry or upset.
Yes, შეურაცხყოფა, დაცინვა.
And our last word of today is vibrant. Vibrant. Something lively, something exciting, something bright and colorful.
ხასხასა, მკვეთრი.
I think we should ask a question to our audience.
Yes, of course, and the question is from the vocabulary part. What does the prefix self show at the beginning of a word? Give us 3 more examples.
The prefix self shows that the word itself refers back to the speaker in some way. And the 3 examples would be self-esteem, self-improvement, and self-employed.
Thank you very much. So, very nice examples, and these words are very often used in conversation, daily conversations.
Yeah, it's an easy way to refer back to yourself.
Yep.
Just add self. Okay, we have another question for the audience. In what season can you see vibrant, bright colors?
I think it's late spring and late autumn.
Great answer. That is exactly the time we see the best colors of nature.
Yes, and different colors, right? Different types of green, yellow.
Gold, red, and many other colors.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Okay, Miss Maka, I think it's time we spoke about the author, Frances Hodgson Burnett. She was popular in her time and our time as well. That's the late 19th century and even the early 20th century. So it's been more than 100 years that she's remained popular as well. She was born in 1849 in Manchester, England, and she died in 1924 in New York, across the ocean in America.
Yes, and she began writing as a teenager to support her family. Although you may not really recognize her name now, she was, like during her lifetime, she was as popular as some of the writers, like J.K. Rowling, and she really loved Victorian type of clothing, but she was not a conventional woman, and she really had some kind of depression. So I don't know, maybe she was kind of a rebellious person, so we will see.
There's a reason maybe for that, because she had a difficult childhood in the sense of financial security. When she was 3 years old, her father died, and it was up to her mother to take care of the family, and the mother would try businesses and many different ways to keep the family going, but they continued to struggle, unfortunately, and this is a direct cause of why Frances decides to try and write to help the family.
Yeah, and actually she had been writing a lot during her lifetime and before she moved from England, but she left her stories in England. But no worries, she started writing new stories, and her new stories later were published in the magazine.
Mm-hmm. It was in 1886 that one of her big hits, one of the big successful stories first appeared. It was serialized in a magazine. So chapter 1 would be in the first month, chapter 2 would come in the next month, and then so on. It would continue until the whole story was told. This is how they used to do it in the old days. And that story was Little Lord Fauntleroy. And it was also a children's book, but strangely, it appealed to mothers more than kids at the time.
That's interesting. Her later books also include Little Princess, The Little Princess, and of course the book that we are going to talk about today, The Secret Garden. These both books were for children, written for children, but these books also stress the sentimental and romantic themes.
Appropriate, and it's fun once in a while.
Yeah.
Now, as we mentioned before, of course, she started life in England, but then she moved to New York, and she spent the last of her days in New York, and that is where she died.
Let's ask a question from our author's part, right? In what ways was Frances Hodgson Burnett similar to a modern female writer like J.K. Rowling?
She was very popular among children like J.K. Rowling is right now. Also, she was financially successful from her writing.
So, thank you very much. As we heard, she was very popular with children. So I think now, whenever you hear about her and this story, you will read the story Secret Garden. But before we go into details of the when and where part, let's look at the plot of the story. The Secret Garden, novel for children written by American author Frances Hodgson Burnett, and published as a book in form of a book in 1911. So we can say that previously it was serialized in a magazine. So what does it mean, serialized? When it went like one volume in one magazine and then the second volume in another. The pastoral story of self-healing became a classic of children's literature and is considered to be among Burnett's best works.
Mm-hmm. Now, the story centers around the character of Mary Lennox, who initially is living in British India when it was part of the British Empire with her wealthy British family. Cholera epidemic comes around and kills a lot of people, and unfortunately it also kills her parents. And so she's orphaned basically, and she is left alone with her servants of the family home.
So she is sent, after this tragedy, she is sent to England to her widowed uncle. So the uncle's name is Archibald Craven. So at his huge Yorkshire mansion. But the sad thing is that he is rarely at home. Mary is brought to the estate by the head housekeeper who is quite fastidious, and she actually locks Mary in the house and tells her not to explore the surrounding. But it is really funny to tell a child like not to explore the new surroundings, right?
I mean, if you tell me not to do something, I probably will do it. Okay, but this is where something positive comes into her life. So up to now, it's been tragedy after tragedy, but now something positive comes into her life. So this is when she finds Martha, the chambermaid. And Martha is a bit different from the other servants. She's a lot more confident, she's a lot more independent. And this is the start of that positivity I mentioned. Mary is intrigued by Martha's stories about her own family, particularly those about a 12-year-old brother who's going to be very important later on, Dickon. And that's the introduction of Dickon. This boy has some kind of magical connection with animals, like they love him, he loves them, he can kind of talk to them almost. Martha mentions that Mrs. Craven's, so the matriarch of that house, she had a walled garden and it was closed off about 10 years ago when she died.
Yeah, and when she heard the story, Mary is determined to find this garden. So she spends most of the next weeks wandering around and talking to the elderly gardener. So one day, while following a very friendly bird, she found an old key. And she, of course, right away thinks that maybe this is the key that would open the Secret Garden's door. And shortly thereafter, she spots the door on the garden wall, and she tries, and of course it opens the door of the garden, and she lets herself into the secret garden. So this is the turning point of the story. This is when the story begins, I would say.
One day, around this time as well, she discovers the boy Dickon, and he begins helping her. So they become friends quickly. He begins helping her in this secret garden to take care of it and to transform it. Mary later also uncovers the source of very mysterious, strange sounds that she'd been hearing around the house that she thought initially might have been a ghost or something. They turn out to be the cries of her sick cousin, a 10-year-old boy named Colin, and he's been confined to his room without much social contact, and he's tended to by the servants of the house.
Thank you. So, of course, you will need to read the book to see how the book ends, and of course, we recommend you to read this book.
Okay, I think it's time for a question to the audience. Let's talk about Mary. Do you think her curiosity is a positive character trait in this story?
Yes, because she is open to new experiences. Curiosity leads her to the secret garden, and only then can she find the boy Colin.
Very good answer. Yeah, that is exactly it. It's that curiosity that helps us discover new things about ourselves and about the world.
And opens the new doors for us. Okay, now what about the second question? What does this story try to teach us about the value of friendship?
As we see in the beginning of the story, Mary is quiet, indifferent to people, and after finding new friends, she transforms from a spoiled child to a kind person. And this helps both ways, as Mary could help Colin overcome his isolation.
Yeah, definitely. So of course, friendship is never one-sided, right? So it helps me and then I help them, maybe.
The other person. Yeah, it's one of the great things you can commit to in life, a good friendship with someone. Okay, let's move on to characters now. Our first character is Mary Lennox, the protagonist of the story. She's about 10, which suits a children's story. Now, her mother, as you remember, died early, but before then, they were already not that close anyway. Her mother didn't want her, and her father, back in British India, was always busy. She began to think of herself as an ugly child and an unloved child, so she has poor self-image of herself. And Mary becomes to believe that she can never be loved and that she would always be by herself even when she grows older.
Yeah, and also the servants find Mary quite unpleasant to deal with. But then she begins to learn to be self-sufficient when her maid Martha actually learns her a lot of things, like including how to dress herself, right? So, and she also makes friends for the first time in her life, and this must be really powerful for her to change her personality. While exploring the grounds, she also started to be interested in gardening, and the garden transforms her into a very kind girl who is ready to move forward into adulthood.
So we have a character who's quite multidimensional. She starts out one way and transforms slowly over the story to become something much bigger and better. Okay, let's move on to the next character, Colin Craven. He is the young master of the mansion that Mary comes to, the Craven house. 10 years ago, around the time of his birth, his mother died falling out of a tree in that secret garden. And that might be why it was closed off.
Yeah, maybe. And also Mr. Craven got depressed, of course, after he lost his beloved wife, and he hired servants to take care of the little son, Colin. And he believed, so father believed, that Colin was deformed, and which makes Colin believe that he would grow some kind of hunchback, and he would never ever be able to make to adulthood.
Wow, so far two characters with poor self-esteem.
Yeah.
But because everyone believes that Colin's going to die, he's extremely spoilt. He becomes a spoiled child, and he does nothing for himself. He starts to act crazy to deal with that grief of losing his mother, and he becomes lonely, and so that's a lot of negative characteristics already.
He desperately wants to make his father proud, and he really wants to become a real boy. Can you imagine a real boy who would continue living and will live forever and ever? As he improves, he stops resenting his mother for dying. So we can see that he was blaming his mother that she left him, right? And decides to think that her portrait that he had in his bedroom was not taunting him. So actually, she was now smiling at him.
A positive change.
Yes.
A positive change, which seems to be a theme we should discuss later on.
Yeah.
Now our next character, Martha. She's the young chambermaid who, if you remember in the summary, starts the transformation of Mary's life. She is a great influence, basically, on Mary.
Yes, and as the oldest of 12 children, of course it is expected that she is able to take care of the children. But when she meets Mary, and when she realizes that Mary cannot really dress herself, she's a bit surprised, of course, and it's a new kind of problem for her.
Let's talk about her character a little bit. And she's extremely kind, loves her mother, and she gets certain days off in the month where she goes back to her family home and takes care of her family.
She and Mary form a very friendly relationship, so they become friends, and especially after the fact that Mary from now on can take care of herself. So Martha starts talking and telling the stories of her family, and especially the stories about her little brother Dickon.
Let's move on to Dickon now. He's also the last of the main characters that we're focusing on. He spends most of his time on the moor, out on the fields, enjoying the fresh air and making friends with animals. So he's got that kind of personality.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the story, we can see that Mary describes this little boy like an unattractive boy with ruddy cheeks and an upturned nose. But later, as she becomes friends with Dickon, we can see that her description actually changes, and now she finds him pretty attractive, or she doesn't even mind this fact.
That's a good point. And it turns out that Zikin is a good boy. He's strong, trustworthy. He's got good characteristics. And that's in fact why Mr. Craven, the father, trusts him to be Colin's guardian, kind of.
Yes, so we talked about the characters, and of course we are now interested what the audience will say and how the audience will answer our questions. Which two characters undergo the most of the changes?
I think Mary and Colin. Mary goes from being unpleasant and indifferent to being kind and independent. And Colin, on the other hand, goes from being fearful and isolated to being a positive thinker and kind.
Very good, thank you. And we can see that instead of from negative to positive, from positive to negative, we can see a positive change in both of the characters.
Yeah, it seems to be a major theme of this novel. Now, we do have another question for our audience. Why does Mary become friends with Dickon?
In my opinion, Dickon is very confident and outgoing person, and probably he has many stories to tell, and his love to animals is a good example of his of his generosity.
That's a great answer, actually. Yeah, he would be a positive influence. He's such a positive character himself, and Mary has come from such a kind of negative beginning. So,
yeah. So, talking about the negative beginning, now let's see when and where the story happened. So, in 1911, a recently orphaned 10-year-old girl, Mary, is sent from her home in British India to her uncle's house, mansion, in Yorkshire, England.
Yeah, we should mention something about British India, or they used to call it the British Raj, and it was under British rule in India.
Yeah. But where? This story takes place in many different places. In the beginning, the setting is, as we mentioned, in India.
Mm-hmm. But then as the story progresses, it moves off to Yorkshire, England, and the mansion of the Craven family.
Yes, and now let's look at the question, Mr. Darrell.
Yes, here is the question. Do you think moving to another country can change a person? And how?
Of course it can change a person because it broadens your mind and makes you see things in a different way. For example, Mary changed into a more positive person.
Very good answer. For example, look at me. I'm temporarily in a new country and I think I've changed.
You've changed?
I have changed.
Of course, positively.
Yes, of course, but that's a story for another time.
Okay, but before that, let's look at the main themes of this story. So the first main theme we would like to focus on is healing. So this is the dominant theme of The Secret Garden. We can see both Mary Lennox and Colin Craven. They both transform from sickly, friendless, and self-absorbed children to physically and mentally healthy ones.
And not just the kids. Mr. Craven, the father of Colin, overcomes depression after a long time by reconnecting with that son of his.
Yeah, and all three characters we see that must heal aftermath of death. So Mary loses her parents, so Colin loses his mother, and of course Mr. Archibald, he loses his beloved wife.
Mm-hmm. But healing can happen not just with people, but with places as well. We're talking about the Secret Garden. Initially, after the death of the mother, the Craven mother, it becomes abandoned, overgrown, wild, but then it slowly transforms as well after being cared for by the characters. It transforms into a lovely garden.
Yeah, so we can add that there are some changes. So from an overgrown, neglected garden with dead and dying plants to a well-tended, vibrant garden full of healthy plants.
Okay, let's move to our last theme of positive thinking. It's all over this book, as we've mentioned from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. Burnett seems to believe that negative thoughts can be pushed out of your mind and positive thoughts will grow in its place.
Yes, and as we can see, little Mary, when she finds the garden, she sees lots of weeds and grass. So we can see that it's a symbol. These grass and weeds, they symbolize the negative thoughts. And once they have been removed, we can see that positive thoughts have the way to come in.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, Colin, the kid, mentions that one way to take care of such negative energy is to say nice things to people. Just say that and good things will happen.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Darrell. And I really think that our audience has an interesting answer about this, one of our themes. Can people be taught to think positively?
I think that everything can be taught if there is a strong will. You can train yourself to think positively, and for example, if you get a negative thought, just block it out and don't give it a power to control you.
Thank you very much. That's a nice point to finish our program with, right? So to think always positively. So it's time to wrap it up.
It is indeed. Let's look once more at the main points.
Yep. So our first part was about the author, of course. This is Frances Hodgson Burnett.
Then we spoke about the summary of the novel. And as you know, it's about this secret garden that is a symbol of transformation.
And of course, the characters. So we have Mary Lennox, Colin Craven, Martha, and Deacon.
Mm-hmm. And then the setting, beginning of the 20th century, 1911-ish, and the setting is in Yorkshire, England.
And the main themes that we had were healing and positive thinking.
Okay, well, let's move to the homework question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is the homework for us, Mr. Darrell, today?
I'm glad you asked. Now, it is this question. Imagine the secret garden after the story that we have just told. What would it look like? What might you see there? And just describe it.
წარმოიდგინეთ საიდუმლო ბაღი იმ ამბის შემდეგ, რომელიც გიამბეთ. აღწერეთ ის, როგორია.
Please send your answers to the address you see on the screen.
გამოგვიგზავნეთ საშინაო დავალება ეკრანზე მითითებულ მისამართზე.
Okay, Ms. Maka, it's been a great discussion. I've enjoyed the answers from our audience,
Yes.
and I'm looking forward to our TV audience's responses.
Thank you for the positivity for today.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much and have a nice week. See you next week.
Have a great week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.